friend we have in Jesus, all our sins and griefs to bear.
What would you do if your parent asked you to stop friending your best friend? Will you choose your parent or you will choose your best friend? Jonathan, the best friend of David, was in this situation. Let's watch these videos and see what Jonathan will do.
After David had killed Goliath, King Saul called for David. Saul explained that he would not allow David to return home to his father. From then on, David was successful in every mission Saul gave him. His success led Saul to make him the leader of all his soldiers. This decision pleased all of Saul's people, as David was well liked by everyone. He was especially favored by Jonathan, Saul's son. Jonathan grew to love David as he loved himself. One day, Jonathan made a covenant with David and gave him his robe, armor, sword, bow, and his belt as a sign of their friendship. When Saul and his army journeyed home after defeating the Philistines, the women in the towns came out to greet them and celebrate their victory. They sang and danced to songs of joy played on their instruments. They sang, "Saul has slain his thousands, and David his tens of thousands." This well-meaning song did not please King Saul at all, as it gave David credit for more of the victory. In his anger, he became jealous and suspicious of David, wondering if he would try to take his kingdom from him. From that moment on, Saul kept a close eye on David. The next day, as usual, David was playing his lyre for Saul when an evil spirit from God came on Saul. Thinking to himself, "I'll pin David to the wall," Saul grabbed a spear and threw it at David. Saul threw the spear at David twice, but David dodged it both times. Because Saul could see that the Lord was with David and that the Lord was no longer with him, Saul was afraid of David. In an attempt to send David away from him, Saul gave him command over 1,000 men. David led the troops in their campaigns, and he was successful in everything he did because the Lord was with him. All of Israel and Judah loved David because he led them in their campaigns. Seeing how successful and loved David was made Saul's fear grow even more. After a failed attempt to have David killed in battle against the Philistines, Saul made a new plan to kill him. Saul spoke to his son Jonathan and all his servants and told them to kill David. Jonathan, who was David's friend, told David about his father's plan. "My father is looking for a chance to kill you. Be on your guard tomorrow morning and go into hiding," Jonathan warned. Jonathan promised to go to his father and speak on David's behalf. The next day, Jonathan reminded Saul of the good that David had done for him and that he had done nothing to him. "Do not sin against your servant David, as he has not sinned against you," he pleaded. Saul listened to his son and made a promise, saying, "As surely as the Lord lives, David will not be put to death."
Jonathan and David were best friends. It didn't matter to Jonathan that one day David would be king over Israel and take the place of his own father, King Saul. Jonathan would always do what was best for his friend because he loved David and he knew that God was with him. King Saul, on the other hand, was so jealous of David that he wanted to kill him. David feared for his life. He asked Jonathan, "Why is your father trying to kill me? And what have I done to make him so angry?" Jonathan was surprised by David's question. "How do you know my father wants to kill you?" He promised me he was not mad at you anymore and would never hurt you." But David was convinced that Saul hated him. So the two of them came up with a plan that would prove whether or not David was in real trouble with King Saul. When they were done discussing the plan, David hid and Jonathan returned home to his father. And so the plan moved forward. David did not show up for an important dinner with the king and his family, even though everyone expected to see him. If the king asked why David was not at the dinner, Jonathan was to tell the king that he was attending the feast with his own family. The hope was to find out whether Saul would be angry with David or not. As the dinner went on, the king could not help but notice that David was not sitting in his place at the table. He asked Jonathan, "Where is David, and why is he not here?" Jonathan wasn't even finished explaining when the king became very angry. He was so filled with hate that he picked up his spear and hurled it at his own son. Jonathan knew without a doubt that David was in real danger. David, still hiding, waited for the signal that would tell him whether or not it was safe for him to come out. Jonathan would shoot 3 arrows close to the target if David was safe, but he would shoot them past the target if he was still in danger. Jonathan shot the arrows far into the distance. David now knew the truth. Saul wanted to murder him. As soon as he was sure he would not be seen by anyone else, David came out from where he was hiding and he fell on his face to the ground before Jonathan, filled with love and thankfulness for what his friend had done for him. The two friends held each other and cried over Saul's actions. The king had not only rejected David, but wanted him killed. Now the two friends and their two families would be separated forever. David cried even more than Jonathan. So Jonathan truly loved David as his own soul. He knew that God was with David and that he would be king over Israel. Not only had Jonathan protected David with his own life, but he continued to stand by David to the very end. The last recorded words of Jonathan to his beloved friend were, "Do not fear, my father, for you are destined to be king, and I will be second to you. Even my father knows this."
Jonathan was a good son. He obeyed his father King Saul. And at the same time, he's also David's dearest friend. They were so close, like brothers. King Saul commanded Jonathan to stop friending David and also asked him to kill David. The first thing Jonathan did was to talk to David to understand the situation. And after that, he tried to talk to his father, King Saul. He tried to be the peacemaker between King Saul and David. But eventually, King Saul couldn't overcome the jealousy in his heart. He still wanted to kill David. The reason given by King Saul to Jonathan was that Jonathan's supposed to be the next king, not David. That's why he has to kill David so that Jonathan can be the next king. Jonathan knew that David was chosen by God. He knew that David would be the next king, and he doesn't mind. He knew that David didn't do anything wrong to him or to his father. So Jonathan risked his life to help David to escape. So at the end, David successfully escaped from King Saul. But before David left Jonathan, they cried badly because they knew that they might not meet each other again. True enough, this last farewell in 1 Samuel chapter 20 was the last time they meet. Jonathan was killed in the battlefield not long after that. Jonathan was a humble man, and he also a good man. He was forced to choose between his parent and his best friend. He chose righteousness. He chose God's way. He didn't choose to side his father nor to side his best friend. Instead, he chose to stay at God's side. If you were in a similar situation like Jonathan, try to talk to your parent first. Try to understand their point of view, why they dislike your best friend. And after that, you try to explain how you think about your best friend. And if things doesn't work out at the end, you pray to God. Don't straight away choose to side your parent or choose to side your friend, your best friend. Always stay on God's side. Pray to Him. Ask Him to show you the way that you should go. God will give you wisdom. Be a wise and loyal friend. May God bless you. Have a blessed week.
Everything to God in prayer.